Hi, BCC. This is part two of your preparation for your final exam, and that is a discussion of Anna Lappé's The Climate Crisis at the End of Your Fork. So, again, I want you to think about her whole thesis, and that is that the choices we make in the food that we eat really do make a difference in the climate. And, we can make a change, not just in changing a light bulb, but in thinking about our food choices. And it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. It could be changing what you eat a few days a week, and then you could escalate it from there. But to think about how we impact the world. All right, so there's one statistic I wanted to point out to you, and that is that the U.S. Department of Agriculture said that it takes 7 pounds of grain to make 1 pound of beef. And there's some dispute as to it might even take more than that. And what does that mean? It means that, when you have uh, the land that is used to make feed for animals, that it not only uses up that land to in this whole process of food production of making meat for Americans to eat hamburgers, uh, it it also uses up the land and destroys the land. So when we run out of land here, we go to other countries and we rip out rainforests and forests and use the land for feed. We grow corn for feed to feed the cows that then we consume. So it's a vicious cycle. So, and the other statistic was that it takes 7.3 pounds for pigs and 3.5 pounds for poultry. So it does take less, obviously, to you know to for chickens. Eating chickens is a better choice, than eating beef. Definitely according to Lappé. So, but the problem remains, how do we change behavior, and that's a different issue that you should think about in this context. We can change behavior one household at a time, and then we can teach our children and grandchildren and our future generations to be more responsible uh, in their choices, on all fronts. All right, so the second part of her discussion is the agriculture connection, which we touched on. That obviously they do overlap, land use, agriculture. But with agriculture, historically, in all countries, historically, uh, citizens would grow their own crops, and small farms would feed a small town. So either you would have your own animals. Often people had small, definitely had gardens where we would grow our own crops, but also chickens and maybe a cow. So and in cities there were still local farms. So it makes sense that if we have to eat certain meats, then if we ate locally produced meat and um, poultry and crops, other vegetables, if we sourced it all locally, it really should be less expensive. So again, that's another issue to think about: is how do we make locally grown produce more uh, available? I see more and more farmers markets. Uh, just over the course of the last 10 years, they're much more plentiful, and they seem to be a little more reasonable in price, and definitely available on a weekly basis. So I'm sure Anna Lappé would approve of that. So, but again, how do we, in poor and lower middle class families, how do we make it so that your food choices are um, are not so expensive? If you can buy a Big Mac for $1 on the dollar menu and French fries for $1, um, why can't we buy produce for a similar price So again, that's something that the government might have to help us with. You know, one of my students once said that in Hawaii, you could use your food stamps at the local farmers markets. I think that's a great idea. You should be able to do that because it makes for healthier food choices, for everyone. All right, so anyway, back to the agriculture connection. The what Lappé is saying is that the old practice of grazing livestock, growing your own vegetables in a garden, that's the most organic you can be, and that relates to Michael Pollan's entire article. Is that just taking a little part of your yard and growing a garden, or if you're in the city like most of you all are, growing tomatoes in a pot or a few vegetables in a pot. It is possible. It's more difficult, but in the old days we had community shared gardens, even in cities, especially in cities, where everyone got a free little piece of land to farm. And some communities still have that, but it's few and far between today. Maybe we should go back to that. I think that Lappé would agree. So, she says historically, properly grazed livestock, this is paragraph 25, produce numerous benefits to land. Hooves aerate soil, allowing more oxygen in the ground, which helps plant growth. Their hoof action also presses grass seed into the earth, fostering plant growth too. And of course, manure provides natural fertilizer. Now, the problem today with the CAFOs, and those are CAFOs, if you're not familiar with the term, and I wasn't before I read this, are confined animal feeding operations. She defines that on my page 707. It's I think it's like the first page of the agricultural connection. So again, we all know that the confined animal feeding operations are not only horrendous, they destroy the land because there's no place to put the manure. So it used to be that you recycle everything. It's like the circle of life, right? So, but with the CAFOs, the confined animal feeding operations, there's first of all, they're inhumane. They say that a pig can't even turn around in its pen. The chickens are so packed close together that they have to give them antibiotics. I firmly believe that the reason many of us are resistant to antibiotics, it's because of those antibiotics in the meat that we eat. They have to. It's this vicious cycle of bad health, really. So you have the mistreatment of animals in these CAFOs, and then you have antibiotics because they're mistreated and packed together. It's all about the mighty dollar, right? So these big companies like Monsanto and Tyson Chicken, they if they produce more, they make more, they can charge less for their chicken. So I guess for the consumer, the reason we pick the Tyson chicken is because maybe it costs 50 cents less a pound than the organic chicken. But I think maybe we need to rethink that. Maybe we need to figure out how to make the healthy choices, again, more economical, easier for us to choose. How do we make that? It's a difficult choice. It's an ethical choice to some degree, but then you need more income to choose that expensive chicken that's healthier. So, but it shouldn't be that way. It should be affordable for all. So that might be that, the counter argument might be for Anna Lappé is, okay, we change our eating habits, but how do we make it accessible for everyone, at every economic level? That's the question. I suppose not eating meat, though, could be less expensive, so, it might, at first, you might think it's more because you're eating more vegetables, but I think that if you supplement it with beans and other kinds of meat that are also less expensive, that we could make it work. And surely locally sourced food is definitely going to be better for the environment. Because again, it gets to the transportation connection, and that leads well to the transportation connection. And I didn't even talk about the fertilizer that's used in the non-organic that ruins the soil, and then it trickles into the waterways. I'm a big proponent of the water I because I'm a paddleboarder, and I feel that everything we do on land impacts the water, because it ends up in the water, all the plastic we use. But that's a whole nother topic. But it's related because it's all about the environment. Okay, so the waste in transportation. This one is pretty straightforward, so I think we can be fast. When we produce meat, we need to take it to market, which means we need to transport it to whoever's going to sell it to the consumer. So they transport it to warehouses that then transport it to the stores that sell it. So you might have a middleman, but in transporting it, we might be producing the meat we might be producing the feed and the meat in another country like Indonesia, and bringing it here. So we're trucking this meat and flying it and bringing it across the world. And so to get that lamb from Australia, it takes a lot to get it to your plate. While if you bought the American-made lamb, it's much more environmentally conscious. So maybe we should think about those choices. So, and she again mentions the factory farming and the CAFOs that transport animals to feedlots and then to slaughter, and then meat must be shipped to retailers and to stores where it is sold to consumers. Americans in particular import and export a lot of meat. In 2007, think of that was a few years ago, the U.S. exported 1.4 billion pounds of beef and veal, 5.4% of our total production of beef, and imported 3.1 billion pounds of the same. One could argue that a lot of that transport is unnecessary from a consumer point of view and damaging to the environment. Globally, international trade in meat is rapidly accelerating. As recently as 1995, Brazil was exporting less than $500,000 worth of beef. A little more than a decade later, Brazilian beef exporters estimated the value of beef exports could reach $5.2 billion, and expects revenues to be $15 billion. So, and that's just from 1995 to 2013. So it's in the billions. So, it's a profitable venture. But the problem is, why do we import and export all of that? Why not just produce it here and keep it here? I suppose the same could be said for certain fruits and vegetables. But the meat industry, as Lappé argues, accounts for a lot of problems that create issues in the environment. All right, I'm going to stop there, and then we're going to do one more video on the organic solution. Take care. I'll see you in a minute.